Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So, guys, with me tonight, I have Jordan Chariton. Jordan Chariton has written an amazing piece for Truthdig detailing problems with this idea of the governor or coming out saying that there is no lead, everything is all clear, the world is great, we're cutting off the water, have at it. And Jordan is making a point that that's not quite true, that there are still problems. And the way that they used to test that kind of had blind spots in the testing that they couldn't account for, and that in no way, and at very least in the way they went about it, where they can give a reasonable degree of confidence of saying all clear, in which the way Governor Snyder said. Jordan, is that a fair approximation of what's taking place? And please, to my audience, hello.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Yeah, that's definitely a fair representation. I actually started reporting on this story back in September, actually. And I just did something radical because most of the news outlets just regurgitate whatever the EPA says.
Yeah.
So when an EPA funded scientist in September had kind of declared like mission accomplished, I did 5 rounds of testing in Flint the last 2 years, and now it's under the EPA limit for lead. I read his report. I read all the science and reports and the data, and not sexy stuff, but I just looked into it, and it really didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I was digging and digging. Obviously, things happened in November, so I got delayed on the story. But what I learned was kind of staggering. You had this EPA-funded scientist basically using 34 homes in a city of 40,000 as like his sample to say the water was meeting normal EPA limits, which is 15 parts per billion of lead. So I looked into his testing. I also looked at the Michigan state testing because there was an EPA-funded test and the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. And between the small sample size, the actual records that they were relying on to decipher if they were actually testing homes that were connected to lead service lines, which obviously those would be, that would be the most at risk to leach lead. You could have copper pipes or plastic, some people have. So to dumb it down, the records of where the service lines are in Flint were written on index cards over the last few decades in pencil. A lot of them were actually tossed out because nobody could read them, and 11 to 15,000 homes were missing.
Wow.
And in my story, I have the guy who actually did the study, University of Michigan Flint did a study where are the lead service lines. And he basically told me, I'm paraphrasing, but like, yeah, I mean, I did the best I could, but I definitely feel like this is a flawed study.
Wow.
And this is what the EPA funded scientists used, as well as the state of Michigan, to say, yes, we met the EPA's lead and copper rule, which states you have to test X amount of homes connected to lead service lines. So there's that kind of like not exact scientific certainty that I found throughout the story. There were also other things, Jamal, like I was stunned. So there's a guy named Bernard Meter. He's in his 60s. I looked, he had over, there's people like him that have in the thousands of parts per billion of lead in their home. 15 is the normal level. And according to the state map, they never went back to retest. So there's examples like that where you just type in an address or zip code and you see last tested in 2016, almost 12,000 parts per billion. Last tested in 2017, hundreds of parts per billion. And they never went back to retest. So basically my story, it's not definitively saying the water's not safe. It is definitively saying the testing that has been used to declare it safe is inadequate.
Inadequate is an understatement. I mean, this is profoundly disturbing. The first time around, they tested 277 homes. And you're making the case that they didn't even go back to the homes that had magnificent amounts of lead to make sure that the lead was out of those particular homes. Like you would think that at the very least you would have the exact same sample to make a determination of whether or not you're clear. I mean, this is abysmal. Like if I'm writing software and I usually would run through a series of tests, and if there's an update, run through another series of tests in the same way. I'm trying to catch the same errors. Meaning you had a sample size that you used to declare that lead was in the water, that the water was unsafe. And then coming back again, you don't use the exact same sample. You
Well,
use a smaller sample and say all clear. That's amazing.
just to be clear, so the EPA funded scientist, his name's Mark Edwards. He started out with 277 homes. His study shrunk down after 2 years to 138.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Maybe homes dropped out of the study. So total, he tested 138. But to satisfy the lead and copper rule, which is the main EPA regulation for water testing, you have to have at least 50% of your samples from homes connected to lead service lines. Well, he says he only tested 17 homes connected to lead service lines. Well, half of 34 is 17. So he only looked at 34 total homes in terms of meeting the EPA's lead and copper rule, because you have to have 50% of your sample connected to lead service lines. So he says he tested 17 homes connected to lead service lines. First of all, even if he did, the city has an estimated 30 to 40,000 lead service lines. So 17,
yeah,
and you're declaring
that's insane. I mean, that's utterly insane. I mean, were these in different parts of the state, or were
that's well,
yeah,
Flint,
or was it
Flint.
clustered in the area?
Yeah, it was all tests in Flint. But as I outlined in the story, there's no way to even verify that he actually tested homes connected to lead service lines or the state, because number one, they didn't like have plumbers go in and like verify, like dig it up.
Mhm.
Secondly, again, the records are it's patchwork. It's on index cards.
I see what you mean. Okay,
Yeah,
so
so
this
the
is even
records,
worse.
the
in this
records
case.
that this EPA funded scientist and the state of Michigan, two separate tests. EPA funded scientist did his test, and the state of Michigan did their own testing. The EPA funded scientist basically was there to confirm the state's numbers. So kind of like thorough, you have one agency reviewing the other.
Right.
They're both claiming they tested homes connected to lead service lines based off a study that the records on that study were written on index cards. I have the guy on the record who did the study saying, yeah, we were missing 11 to 15,000 homes. A lot of them had to be tossed out because we couldn't read them. I do have concerns as far as people using this study to say
the veracity of this study to make claims on. I see what you mean. So this is somewhat worse than I thought then.
Yes.
Okay, so they tested homes throughout Flint, but the way that they tested those homes was relying on data that was somewhat incomplete. And what I mean by it, they didn't go with a plumber to make sure that this is a lead line. They used records that were somewhat dodgy to make a determination on whether the thing that they were testing was actually a lead line. And oftentimes they didn't know. And the person who made the study itself even comes out and says, no one in their right mind should be using this to make a full determination on whether or not this is clear or we're in the clear.
Yes, exactly. But also, it gets worse actually, because
man, I don't know how, but go ahead.
So, okay, Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. Every state has their own EPA. So they are the agency that, in the first place, fucked up the water in Flint because they didn't add the proper corrosion control chemicals. Basically, water utilities add certain chemicals to make sure the water doesn't cause lead to leach off the pipes. So they actually lied to the EPA for almost a year because they told the EPA, yeah, we're adding corrosion control.
5 people in prison for that, right?
Not yet.
Oh, I thought they were indicted. Let's say that way. Or 5 people were convicted.
People are on pretrial right now.
Okay.
So basically, this agency is a history of lying. Okay. So the agency, there's 2 types of testing being done by the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. One is called the Sentinel testing, which the state chooses the homes they're going to test. They choose the addresses, they choose which homes they're going to test. So that's in one bucket. The next bucket is just residential sampling, where any resident could take a test kit that they got at City Hall or wherever, test their water, send it in for testing. That the residents obviously choose, not the state. Well, guess which set of testing is showing up the higher leads?
I would imagine the residents. If I'm taking a guess, I would imagine the residents.
Yes. And The state, like I knocked on doors this past week in Flint. I don't want to get into why, because I don't want the state to know what I know, but you'd be amazed at the homes they chose to test and the homes they didn't. Like I'm talking like one side of the street has like hundreds of parts per billion of lead, didn't test that home. Tested 2 homes across the street, didn't have any lead. Why is that, Jamal? So there is, this agency has a history of lying. This agency, frankly, I mean, you could call it the agency, but the governor of Michigan is in charge of all of this.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You have a Republican governor who doesn't necessarily believe all that much in governmental services.
And he's also told the mayor of Flint to get over it. Like she came out after their last meeting and basically attacked the governor.
Wow.
Because this governor decided to shut down the water pods around the city of Flint using the same exact data that my report goes into as the rationale. Well, we're meeting the EPA regulations, so now we could shut down the pods. Well, Flint's 45% in poverty. I mean, the majority of people cannot afford to go be buying stacks of bottled water now. 18 to 20% don't even have don't have cars. So really, now they're being forced to drink water that is from the tap. Yes, they have a filter, but these filters are flimsy and go bad pretty quickly.
Not just that they're washing that water. I mean, you're still bathing in that water, even if you're talking about a filter. I mean, and I have to be honest, they shouldn't have to do that. I mean, the whole point in a state, are you telling me that we can spend $1 trillion on military but we can't provide clean water? I mean, that's mind-blowing. Well, like that should be grossly unacceptable. I mean, for any city to not be able to, at the very least, at a very minimum, water. I mean, fuck, man. It's amazing. Why did they do this? Why did they switch the water? Because there was nothing wrong with the water prior to them trying to switch the water over to some other kind of main. What was the reason?
I can tell you the reason they gave, and then I can tell you the real reason. So they said,
give us both. Give us both.
They said they were trying to save money because Flint had been getting water for 50 years from Detroit's water system, Detroit Water and Sewage, it was called. So Flint and the governor, the emergency manager, the unelected emergency manager the governor put in, we're very worried about Russia stealing our democracy. We don't care about unelected emergency managers making terrible decisions that poison people. Anyway, they said that Detroit was price gouging, so we want to temporarily switch to the Flint River temporarily while we build our own water pipeline that will be ours, meaning the city of Flint's. So we don't have to pay Detroit anymore. It will be ours. So the Flint River was supposed to be temporary. In reality, that's actually not true because Detroit at the last minute cut down its rates by 50% to try and keep Flint, because Flint was Detroit Water and Sewage largest customer. So Detroit cut it down by 50%. There's an email from a Detroit water official to Flint saying that. So Flint would have saved more money by staying on Detroit at that discounted rate than building this new pipeline. But they wanted this pipeline not particularly to save money, but because it would be a privatized pipeline. And with a privatized pipeline, you know what you could do with a privatized pipeline?
Price gouge.
But also, what do you need a lot of water for? Fracking. So they could take lots of water out of there because Governor Snyder has ramped up fracking all over Michigan, and you can't take endless amounts of water out of a public water utility to frack. You can out of a privatized system. They'll never admit this, but that's most experts, Michigan political wizards know that's why they did it. And what they fatally screwed up, the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, you're supposed to put corrosion control chemicals into the water supply so that the water is treated properly and it doesn't attack age corroding pipes. Like most of the pipes in America are 60 to 100 years old. So they're already corroding and they didn't add the proper chemicals into the water. So people have asked me, and I've actually been attacked, strangely enough, by people like, Jordan, it's cool that you care about Flint, but why do you keep going back there? What about all the other communities contaminated? It's like, as I've always said, because it's not just about Flint. This is ground zero.
Yeah.
This is ground zero for what's going on everywhere. So if you take the attention off of Flint, there are no cameras. Every time I'm there, I'm the only person there. other than the local media, which is useless there. Because if we allow the government to poison citizens, then cover it up, then prematurely declare problem solved, that's the playbook they're going to do everywhere else.
Yeah.
So,
not to mention, it's somewhat of a big deal. Like they're human beings, flesh and blood human beings with families, wife, kids. They have things that they love, things that they hate. They get ornery. They can be happy. They can give love. They can receive love. They can be assholes. You have a human being drinking lead contaminated water. They're not doing it because they have to. They're not doing it because that's the only source. They're doing it because the government itself is allowing it. And not just allowing it, it's pretending as if all is done. Nothing to see here, folks. The idea of attacking you for kind of bringing that out, saying, look, these guys are lying. That's weird to me that you would be attacked for that. And you would think that it would be a monumental story that the government is covering this up to some degree and trying to move on from this. Like I'm gonna make. When I read your article in Truth Dig, I was floored. But like, it's one of those things. Not so much that I disbelieve it, but more so that it's still shocking that they would allow it. Flint, Rob Snyder. One more thing. Explain the emergency manager to people, because I think people realize how undemocratic that is and what that is. And I'm going to let you explain, because people say I always take up too much time when I'm having interviews. So what is the emergency manager, and why did they put the emergency manager in, and what is the problem with having an emergency manager if it's not just kind of sacrosanct of saying emergency manager and the problems associated with it?
Well, it should also be noted, since you cover the fact that Democrats are just as corrupt, first emergency manager was actually put in by Jennifer Granholm, the Michigan governor, before Snyder. So it's not just a Republican thing, but Snyder citing that Flint was basically bankrupt. And this is a much longer discussion, but Flint's basically bankrupt because, like Detroit, you sold all their jobs to Mexico and China and everywhere else, in addition to some other things. But Flint now, modern day, compared to 20, 30 years ago, is like, it's from like suburban utopia to some streets you can't really distinguish from Baghdad. Yeah. I mean, it's so bad. But Snyder, citing Flint can't handle its financial affairs, it's bankrupt, appointed an emergency manager to basically make all financial decisions. Really what it was all decisions. Yeah. So you have a democratically elected mayor that essentially has no power. When I was at the Young Turks, I actually was with my old cameraman. We sat at a meeting where the mayor basically had to grovel in front of like a board of old white guys to get anything approved, like
that's sad.
Money,
that's
things like that.
Sad. That should never happen. Like they've destroyed any notion of democracy, if that makes sense. Like think of it from the standpoint of, you have a governor who doesn't get his way, meaning there's certain states or certain cities that may be a little further to the left, or certain cities that are running through some kind of financial issues, and his response is, let's strip away any notion of a democratic process in those cities, and I'm going to just implant the person who has my workable point of view into that city, and we're going to take control of all of the, because let's be honest, all decisions are financial decisions. You know what I mean? There's if a mayor is not spending money or saving money or something to that effect, is somewhat useless. The idea that they've neutered the mayor in this way is abysmal. I didn't even realize that the emergency manager was still in effect.
Well, no, it's not effect anymore. Okay. They cut that, I believe, at the beginning of this year. But I mean, the mayor, the state controls the purse strings either way. Yeah. So the mayor basically has to put on this happy face to try and get money. And if a lot of Flint residents have wanted this mayor to speak out more loudly against what the governor is doing, including shut down the water pods. The residents are paying for his criminal defense fund, his state officials' criminal defense fund. I saw that. But I also think there's another element, and this was my 10th time there, so I know this pretty well. A lot of people in Flint, white and black, think that this is a kind of a gentrification, borderline ethnic cleansing going on in Flint, where let's benefit of the doubt, it was totally criminal negligence, but not intentionally what happened there. Well, the response has been intentional, because they're essentially leaving these people to fend for themselves. You have people, stacks of medical bills. They're not getting Medicare for all for their poison related illnesses. I just, I was interviewing a resident the other day and I left my computer there. I went back at night to get my computer. She opened the door, literally having heart palpitations. She tells me she gets this 3-4 times a week, in pain 24/7 from lead. Other residents I've met, they go from 0 to 180 in 2 seconds. Mood swings, lead poisoning. I actually knocking on doors this weekend. I met young guy, just moved in with his girlfriend and his 2 kids to Flint, literally have rashes within 3 weeks, all of them. And they're told, oh, their lead levels are fine in their house. So the commons, like, you just have to think common sense wise. Every time I'm there, I meet new people that have not like their illnesses are getting worse, their illnesses are getting worse, but new things popping up. Yeah. Meanwhile, they can't get any coverage. I mean, as soon as I publish this story, and I could do another segment with you, Jamal, on trying to get this story published and the reasons I was told no from corporate outlets and some independent outlets, if I'm going to be honest.
Wait, what do you mean? I didn't know anything about that. You went to certain corporate outlets to try to get the story out. What?
I was working on getting this published. I mean, to my old employer, Jenk's credit, when I was there, he agreed, we could co-publish this because it's not like the Young Turks is known for like written pieces.
Right.
So I was trying to get it published elsewhere. Obviously, things happen, so I was delayed. But I reached out to, I'll keep it real. I mean, the Daily Beast was interested, and all of a sudden they kind of started moonwalking. And it seemed to me it was because I couldn't really create an angle that could connect it to the Trump administration. I had other outlets literally just tell me, we don't have the bandwidth to read this.
Wow, are you serious? What does that mean? We don't have the bandwidth to read this?
Many, at least 10. I must have sent this to 40 places. And I could take it if like they read it and say, oh, we don't think your facts are right or whatever. Like I'll redo it and work on it. I didn't get any of that. I just got, it's too complicated.
What's complicated about it? I mean, the story is straightforward. Like
one outlet told me that, if you can't prove without a shadow of a doubt that the water is not safe, we can't run this. And reading in between the lines, they were worried about their legal liability. And I said to the editor, I said, first of all, unless I had a massive budget to go like hire an independent water tester and go across the city, I can't prove without a shadow of a doubt. But that's not what the story is about. I'm not saying the water is definitively still poisoned. What I am saying, the science and the testing that have been used are inadequate and cannot. And it's not like, I had Ronald McDonald on the record. I had Aaron Brockovich on the record, a congressman, water experts, plumbers, residents. And honestly, I mean, I don't want to put too many people on blast, but there were quite a lot of editors that it was literally 10 pages on Microsoft Word who told me, I'm slammed, I can't read this. I wrote back very passionately, I'm not exaggerating, lives are on the line. I hope you could find the bandwidth this weekend to read it, because literally the media who has stopped covering this is just regurgitating what they're told. But all you got to do is read the story. I don't think any objective person could read this and think this is satisfactory testing to declare a city safe. And it was just it almost, in a weird way, it bothered me, but on the other end, it gave me more validation on the path I'm taking to go independent on my own, because literally you cannot break a real story through if it's not connected to Trump or Russia. I mean, if I could prove that Putin was involved, it would have been published in the New York Times. So it was frustrating because, I have been there so many times. So putting away that I'm a journalist, as a human, I've sat on porches with sick people. I was just sitting with a woman with Parkinson's, no history of it. The doctor says it's from the lead. I mean, I've met so many people that are great people, and they're just getting left to essentially
fend for themselves.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how should they have tested to be accurate? I mean, in my head, if they test the homes that they use to find that there was a problem in the first place, that's a beginning. If you've tested X number of homes and you say, oh, holy shit, we have lead, we need to do something about this. And then 2, 3 years later, you come back and you say, okay, I'm only going to take a subset of that. No, you test what you tested before to come up with the result. What, at least that's in my head, that's a start, to say the least. But because of what's we're talking about is such magnificent consequences to the people who are on the receiving end of it. It looks like you may go a little further than that. What was the right way to test this? And I know you're not a plumber. I know you're not an expert from the standpoint of maybe the fine details, but I'm pretty sure at this point you can give a general idea on how they should have at least tried to go about it.
Well, first of all, like I said a couple minutes ago, you need to test the areas that were the worst affected, because not all the areas of Flint were equally affected. So when I'm on a street and there's a house at 500 parts per billion over here that was not tested, but there's 2 homes here across the street connected to copper service lines that are tested, you wonder why.
I see what you mean. You say at least start with the worst.
Yes.
Like if nothing else, start with the worst. Don't start with the best.
Also, I think, and this isn't just Flint, this is all over the country, but not every situation, you can't have a one-size-fits-all testing policy because every situation is different.
It's not the same.
Most other cities did not have essentially acid water dumped into their pipes for 18 months. So when you're using the same exact testing procedure in Flint that you're using in a city that didn't have that, meaning the same sample size to meet EPA regulations, this and that, well, it's not the same problem. It's not the same gravity of what happened. Most other cities, the contamination comes from age-related corrosion, or you're starting to see a lot of military bases with their fire foam shit leaking into the groundwater. Some groundwater has been contaminated because it's near a landfill that hasn't been sealed properly, and like waste is falling in. Every situation is different. But when this scientist essentially cloaked himself, well, I just met EPA regulations. First of all, my story shows he didn't. But even if he did, that's not enough, because you have a city of 40,000 people, 40,000 homes, and you're essentially testing, according to him, 138. I mean, nobody would think that's a big enough sample size. So that's for starters. The second part is they haven't changed all of the lead service lines in Flint. They've only changed, because they're changing all of the lead service lines, but they've only changed like 1/3 of the city's lead service lines. So this same scientist that my piece goes into at one point was quoted as saying the water is not going to be safe until they're all changed. But now he's cloaked himself. And I didn't point this out in my story because, the story's not only about him, but there is something to be said for scientists skewing results because they're being funded. This gentleman has made over $2 million from the EPA in grants. He's gotten private grants from foundations. And he is on the record in my story as saying it is a big problem in science where scientists kind of skew their results to meet the agency's funding to them. Because the EPA don't want a mass epidemic showing, holy shit, this is still bad 4 years later. They want this cleaned up. The state of Michigan, the Department of Environmental Quality, they want, because Snyder, he'll give billions of dollars of tax breaks to, his donors and corporations, but the water to poor people that have been poisoned, that's too much. We can't afford it. And we see that all over the country, Republican governors, frankly, some Democratic governors. So really, to me, Flint's not just about water. It's about corruption. It's about a lack of humanity, in my view. One resident I interviewed this weekend put it better than I can. She said, this is still a war zone. It really does look like a war zone. If you went down there, I mean, for your first time, within a day, you would not believe that this is not being covered wall to wall, because you literally, some people, their water has been shut off in their home because they don't want to pay for the poisoned water. There's tax liens on their home, so they're being threatened to be evicted. I met one person that literally collects rainwater to drink. I mean, this is America. So, I know Roseanne and what she tweets is really important. I know Trump, today doing his latest Mussolini that he could pardon himself is important. But, I got into it a little bit today on Twitter with CNN's Brian Stelter. because, he was saying something about, well, he was arguing with someone who attacked him for CNN doesn't cover Puerto Rico at all. And he cited, like, I just did a segment on reliable sources Sunday. So I wrote back, I'm like, wow, you did one segment on nearly 5,000 people dying when the government said 60, I don't know, 68. Congratulations. What about your whole network there who isn't covering Puerto Rico, Flint? I mean, there's really, really bad stuff going on with uranium all over the country. And I basically, he said, we cover things based on their newsworthiness. And I replied, no, you don't. You cover things based on ratings.
Newsworthy? I mean, right there, that by itself, who determines newsworthy? And yeah, I agree with you. They determine ratings. Donald Trump puts asses in seats, so they like to cover. I was in, my wife and I went out to lunch with my wife the other day, and we were sitting in the cafeteria. They had the TV on, they had CNN. And the entire time I was there, it was something about Trump. And the woman who was in the back, I was talking to her, and she said, God, I wish they could change anything other than Trump. I'm sick of hearing about Donald Trump, because that's what CNN covers wall to wall to wall. I can turn it on right now, and I would almost guarantee you they're going to be talking about something about Trump or something related to Donald Trump. You're telling me of a situation where human beings are drinking lead water, and CNN is saying that's not newsworthy, because based on what Brian Stelter said, saying that he covered things as newsworthy, if they're not covering it by CNN standard, that's not newsworthy. That's a nonsense standard if you're gonna make that case. There are people drinking lead. I mean, shit, man. Like, I find this to be a magnificent deal, and I often get annoyed when stories come up like this, because my feeling is this is such a magnificent deal that this wouldn't take place, that you wouldn't think that this would take place in America. And the idea that it's not just Flint, it's all across the United States. Chicago, I was reading a story the other day about Chicago having a lead issue in their water, that they tested with the idea that there was not going to be an issue, found an issue, and Rahm Emanuel buried it.
Well, by the way, man, and Flint residents get very frustrated because the media only talks about lead, but there's been independent testers that have gone into Flint and other communities, East Chicago, and they're not funded by the state, the EPA, maybe some funding from nonprofits. They have found bacteria in the water. They have found things like chloroform in the water, like those movies where they, put that napkin around you and you pass out. Like, that's chloroform. Like, they have found arsenic in water. They have found some shit that does not belong in water. And what's really staggering to me is I went to one resident's house the other day. She had like an orange amoeba-like growth on her faucet.
Jesus Christ, that's so disgusting.
And for all, they were pointing out to me, that showed up outside, but there's probably growths like that inside too, because you had untreated water going into already corroded, age-related pipes for 18 months. That doesn't go away in 2.5 years, particularly when the pipes have not been changed. They say, well, we've been adding phosphates, which are supposed to coat the pipes. But, I've talked to plumbers, I've talked to experts. It's not a slam dunk that it always does that. I don't want to get too scientific, but there's also lead service lines that also have galvanized steel. Galvanized is extremely difficult. Plumbers say it's almost impossible to recoat damaged galvanized pipes. So at the end of the day, what I see poor Black people, I see poor white people, and I see a lack of priority to make this whole. You better damn believe if Flint happened where I live right now on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, the National Guard would be here and it would have been fixed in, 6 months. This is not just, this is not only a racial issue, it's a poverty issue. Let me tell you something, Snyder, his administration preemptively changed the pipes in Ann Arbor, wealthier community in Michigan, Grand Rapids, communities that don't have a known lead problem, changed them all. So you tell me, and that's why I stay on this, because I won't get into it, but I did have some disagreements with the Young Turks at the amount I was going, and I told them what I'm telling you. I'm not an octopus, so I can't go everywhere. Yeah. But to me, it's a disgrace that there is no media attention on this, and the residents there complain the local media basically just regurgitates what the state says. I've noticed that happens in many states. The local media,
their state sanctioned media. I mean,
yeah.
outside of the name.
So I believe you have to, everyone talks about normalizing Trump, but if I stop covering this or journalists stop covering this, you normalize poisoning American citizens, doing substandard testing after the fact, threatening them to take away their home if they don't pay for the poison water. Frankly, where is the cry out for Medicare for all for Flint residents? Because Medicaid's not covering all their bills. Medicare's not covering all their bills. I just talked to one resident who's literally donating plasma to
Jesus Christ.
afford his hospital bills. Like, this is happening in America.
This is kind of my point. This is kind of my point. So what are the residents doing in this case? Are they having a lawsuit? Two questions. Are their bills being covered? Because at this point, we know as a flat fact, in the same way that we know air, that we know breathing, that there was lead in those pipes, that there was other stuff in those pipes, that people have been drinking that stuff, that the state that was supposed to be there to make sure that people were not drinking water contaminated with chemicals, hid it. I mean, you have 5 people were indicted. They hid the fact that stuff was in the water, didn't say anything about it. They did all of this for a profit motive, this kind of cost-benefit analysis that didn't take human beings into account, and to essentially privatize the water despite having a decent rate from the state. We know this. What are the residents doing? Meaning, is there like a class action lawsuit against the state at the very least for the medical bills that these people are getting from drinking the lead water that we know was there and that we know was the fault of the city? And the second question is, what are the residents doing from a political context to try to change the scenario, at the very least some level of retribution, and I would say to be vindictive and go after people that caused it? I hope that question makes sense. It's 2 parts.
Yeah. I think that,
what are they doing from a political standpoint?
well, first and foremost, and this is kind of hard to even explain if you haven't been there, but I would also say, like, majority of residents aren't doing anything because they're just sick. I mean, but they know
that illness is attributed to the state. That doesn't piss like
no. There's pissed off residents, but I'm saying, like, a lot. I probably at this point interviewed like between 100 and 200, and there's always kind of like the same folks that go to protest at the Capitol or protest at City Hall or whatever. But a lot of them, there was a legal victory last year. The Concerned Pastors, the ACLU Michigan chapter, resident Melissa Mays had sued the state and the EPA, and they won a $97 million settlement. Wow. That got the state to cover at least 18,000 lead service lines that they had to fix. And there were other provisions in the lawsuit, like bottled water, which they've already broken.
They've canceled. They've canceled that.
So they won one legal thing. There are class action lawsuits going on, but for the most part, Governor Snyder has escaped any type of prosecution. His the top official that's facing involuntary manslaughter charges is the director of Health and Human Services. The chief medical officer is also facing involuntary manslaughter. They were both at the end of their pretrial process. But the governor, who actually perjured himself in front of Congress, it was proven that he lied about the first time he heard about the Legionella outbreak that cost 12 lives that we know of. Most people think it's more than that, but they're kind of cooking up those numbers too. He escapes for some reason that I don't understand. Democratic Congressman Elijah Cummings, when it came out that he lied, said, "We're going to look into that." I'm still waiting for the result of that investigation. But yeah, I mean, the residents, there's only so much they could do because the deck is stacked against them. I mean, the only politician that I'm aware of that has even done anything, no surprise, is Bernie Sanders. He recently went to Flint to talk to residents and get an update. And one resident, I end my story this way, basically told him they're leaving us here to die. So Bernie's office, I know, has taken an interest in what's going on there still. The congressman who represents Flint has kind of talked to the cameras about Flint, but in real practice, Congressman Kildee, I haven't seen him really asking the questions that need to be asked about the science He said he was against the water pods being shut down. But at the end of the day, like, we would not accept this kind of treatment if it was in Boston or New York or LA. You know, there'd be riots, there'd be protests. So I think that, unfortunately, the media descended on Flint before the age of Trump. And now the media really, if it's not, the media is more an echo chamber for visceral reactions to things rather than actual news. So Trump tweets, Trump purposely tweets out these authoritarian, absurd things for the reaction to dominate the news cycle. That's how he got elected, and that's how he plans on getting reelected. Dominate the news cycle, stay, you know, rile up the base, rile up my followers. And the media just follows it like sycophants, and they say, well, he's out of the norm. No, you know what's out of the norm? When citizens get poisoned and 4 years later they're still sick. And to answer your question, to my knowledge, there's never been a bill put forward for Medicare for all for Flint residents. I have personally spoken with residents that are going bankrupt because they can't afford lead poisoning, but bacteria. It could cause everything from kidney failure, liver disease, cognitive, memory. One guy told me he doesn't even remember how to drive to his parents 5 blocks away. This is going on. And, you know, I've learned through just being out in the country, these stories aren't sexy anymore because the corporations have taken over our media. If you're a real journalist, number 1, corruption. Number 2, inhumanity. Number 3, laws being broken. That's a damn good story, you know?
Story.
But
I read this. I said to myself, this is, you would think this would be a mind-blowing story. At the very least, it looks like it would demand some level of attention from somebody in one of these media outlets that would go themselves. I mean, CNN has all the resources in the world to check this stuff out. You would think that they would be like, are you telling us that the mayor lied or that the governor lied? Now, right there, because, you know, the media goes with this idea of these people are just honorable gentlemen that have these kind of political ideologies, and that ultimately they're still trying to do what's best for the public. So for them, the idea that the governor lied through his teeth about making sure people had water should be a big story just based on their own modus operandi of the way they look at the world and politics. I mean, that by itself should you know, but of course the Brian Stelter, they don't have the bandwidth for that stuff. They don't have the bandwidth. They just cover newsworthy, and this isn't newsworthy.
You brought up something really important. So I said to Brian Stelter in our little Twitter thing, I said, you know, little old me, I mean, let's keep it real. I got fired. I'm living off savings right now. Actually, viewers have been amazing. I mean, my Patreon is growing, and this last trip to Flint, I got over $2,000 from viewers just to cover my costs.
Nice.
Because people like want real reporting. The problem is a lot of people aren't seeing the content because of YouTube and other things. But you know what's amazing to me, the resources that CNN has, if they, and MSNBC and the New York Times, if they would even dedicate, let's say, an hour of airtime a day to other stories, you know, community issues, water contamination, police brutality, minimum wage fights, those things. Just the resources they have to send reporters to these areas, to stay in those areas. I mean, you could really get some attention on these stories, because a lot of what causes activism is when people are woken up, right?
That they know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working off a shoestring budget. I know a lot of freelance journalists that are working off less than I have. And we're, fortunately, just by talking to residents and getting their story out, and honestly, I can't get into the whole thing because I don't want to let Michigan what I know, but I found out some things this week, Jamal, that make the story I published look like child's play.
And this story already looks pretty bad, Jordan.
When
already looks pretty bad.
When I am able to publish what I know, I have to gather more information. Let's just say I don't know any corporate outlet or any outlet that will be able to say no to it, because I think I have some strong evidence that there were more nefarious things done. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's about, yeah, we're all humans. So it's entertaining sometimes to watch, like, the buffoonery Trump does. It's scary too sometimes, but it's entertaining to see, like, Rudy Giuliani making a fool of himself. But I have personally been affected by this because, let me rephrase, I this hits me hard because I've been there 10 times, and some of these people are more than just like people I've interviewed. They've become friends, and I feel a responsibility to keep the truth out there because, like I've always said, like, yes, it's Flint, and I've already gone to other communities to cover water issues and other things. But if I go and journalists go, then they're just left there essentially to die, and I'm not gonna let that happen. I'm gonna do whatever I can do to make sure this isn't normalized and make sure a lot of the facts that are being buried get out there.
I'm trying to put my finger on why the story bothers me so, and I think I know what it is. Well, just for the just basic reason of empathy, but there's something else. When my mom one time she was coming to the hospital, they had a hurricane in Virginia, and the hurricane knocked out all the water, um, knocked trees and everything else down. Electricity, power lines gone. I think it was like a week or so. And you're in the hospital. There's no lights. You're running on emergency generator power. The water in the toilet stopped. I'm throwing up at blood every hour on the hour. Literally, you can clock it almost like a timer. And the nurse was nice as could be. She would come in and she would kind of get paper because that's all they could get. My mom is driving home one of these days and she's coming to the hospital. She's listening to the radio and they're arguing about nonsense. Like they're having like this kind of discussion. I don't remember what it was about, but she was saying, she was sitting there listening and saying, my kid is sick. It's like, what's wrong with you people? My kid is sick. And it wasn't just this kind of specific thing of her kid being sick. It was this thing of people are living in unreality. Like the reality of the situation is that people are struggling. Like half of the country being in poverty. And then on top of that, you add a certain section of the community that's ignored, that's forgotten, that doesn't even have political process because they put an emergency manager in the situation. And the media looks at this and ignores it. They turn a blind eye to it. Even like you say, lefty media, where you're saying, look, this is a big fucking deal of what's taking place. Here's the story. And for anybody to say, I don't have bandwidth for a story where people are drinking lead, there's gross problems with that, to say the least. When you put your other story out, please don't forget smaller outlets talking about me, only me. When you publish that story, I'm going to ask this: is there anything else you want to tell the audience, whether about you, whether about this particular story, or in general? I leave this somewhat of an open and expansive question because I leave it to the person who's here to give their take.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I was driving in Flint the other day, and I don't know, it was kind of this. Sometimes you have moments where like it's just emotional for you, and I saw like the Flint water treatment plant. Every city has the water tower, and I just looked at it, and I was like, you know what? Obviously, the last few months have not been so easy for me, but I'm exactly where I need to be now. Like I even though it's hard, I mean, I don't have the funding, so if your viewers want real reporting, that's how you do it. Patreon.com / Jordan Chariton Reports. But like, it's really nice now to have the freedom to really go on my path because, now like I'll be going back to Flint and I probably won't even be live that much. I'm just going to be pounding the pavement and talking to people and reporting. And I didn't really have that liberty. No attacking on the Young Turks, but like you don't have that liberty when you work for a media company where you have to churn stuff out every day. So yeah, I mean, I am trying to build this network from the ground up. We have 400 now, almost 400 paid subscribers. Like I said, we're getting for specific trips, people have been contributing, and it's awesome to see, not just like when I get an alert, like somebody's left money, but the messages I'm getting are really, really exciting because it's the same stuff we're talking about. It's like, I can't believe nobody's talking about this. I've had people after I interview a specific resident reaching out to me via email saying like, how can I help that resident? Can I have her contact? I want to help. So it's nice to see like some humanity stepping in here. And it's nice to see like, if what I'm doing is like a focus group, it's nice to see that people want the real journalism, because we could, like I look at the Twitter now, and even from progressive lefty people and the shit that gets talked about all day and the bullshit and the trivialities. I'm not going to mention names, but some of these people just sit on Twitter all day and talk about, in the grand scheme, meaningless stuff because we're all jaded. I used to be jaded. Before I got out on the road and went into these communities, I honestly, I liked Obama. I didn't know as much as I know now. I was more of a card carrying Democrat, but like, I've been fortunate to go out and really just see, you said unreality. I always call it an alternative reality. My business partner, Jen, who's been amazing helping me get this off the ground, she was my camera person because I don't have a full-time camera person in Flint. And she had the experience that I've been having, your experience with your mother. When I go back to the hotel at night and I put on CNN just to see what they're talking about, it is a different planet. And it makes you furious because I'm out talking to sick people all day. People, and by the way, I shouldn't have, but just so I could see for myself, I drank the water this week to see, is this normal?
What the hell are you doing?
Oh, no. I took like a sip.
Please don't drink the water.
I took a sip. It was disgusting. It tasted like somebody was punching you in the face. It has this bitter taste to it. And this was from a house that was declared, oh, you're good, under the EPA limit. So all I ask, whether you could fund me, whether you can't, if you can't, that's fine. Please, number one, try to watch these videos, my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jordan Chariton Reports. But number two, just on your own time, social media, however you could do it, don't forget about the people in Flint. And also research your community, because you'd be surprised. You could call your water authority. You could ask them, I want to know what industrial plants are near my home. I want to know, has there been contamination issues? Are there any landfills near where I live? And how often have you been testing the water? Because you're supposed to test the water every quarter. Not every water utility is doing that. So it's not the sexiest topic, but I think it's pretty sexy to live. And you cannot live without clean water.
Man, God, that sucks. That so sucks. I'm curious about this. And this is not to, I mean, the question is odd, but I think it's pertinent. Did you reach out to TYT Politics for the story? I mean, maybe this is not up their alley anymore, or to the network itself to push this particular story?
Nope.
Okay. Fair enough. Let's see. Let me check audience.
But I would honestly think TYT, based on their mission and being progressive, they'd want to cover this. So hopefully they do.
I hear you.
I didn't watch the whole thing, but I watched one of your videos last week.
The black thing?
Yeah.
Man, you have no idea how much that pissed me off. And one of my subscribers sent me a video. She was like, hey, take a look at this. And she says, I feel like they're putting this guy down. And as I watched the video, it was so over the top from the standpoint of identity. And there's a part in the video where he's like, this is what Republicans do. They pay people to attack the people of their own group. And it's like, but what's the difference if this guy was white? I mean, the majority of the country, or half of the country, is living in poverty or poor. Blacks only make up 13% of the population, and making up 13%, certainly the entirety of the 13% is not poor, meaning the other part has to be made up by whites. So you're still talking about a large number of whites who are dirt poor. If Republicans, they took issue with this idea of this black man tricking other black people. I don't even know from the standpoint if he's tricking anybody or if he was just angry and he thought the Democratic Party needs to break. And this idea of you have nowhere else to go that the Democratic Party uses for blacks, Hispanics, workers, and the rest of the country, essentially holding the country hostage, needs to be broken. And the only way you break that is by stop voting for him. Now, if he came to that conclusion and he said, okay, fine, I'm going to vote for Trump and I'm going to try to get people to vote for Trump because African Americans are being gypped and there's nothing that you're going to get out of this situation by voting for Democrats, then he's not doing that out of some level of I'm tricking people. He's doing it because in his head, his political strategy is to break the model that the Democrats have been using for 20 years. It annoyed me that their network, that's supposed to be something, at this point, like MSNBC Light, is attacking the guy, full-throated attacking the guy. James said, I want nothing to do with him. You know nothing about him. You went on screaming that people should vote for Hillary Clinton. That video annoyed the shit out of me because it felt like it was isolating this particular person as an African American, and that there was something fundamentally wrong with him making this argument about people not voting for Hillary Clinton. It annoyed me like nobody's business. And somebody got mad at me about this, saying, I think you're being unfair in that video. Whatever.
I mean, I think that whether it's TYT or any outlet, if your strategy to try and get rid of Trump is to demonize Trump voters, whether they're white, black, purple,
or anywhere
and
in between, yeah.
suggests that they're stupid or they were hoodwinked or whatever, you're kind of doing what the Democratic Party did in the first place, which
Yeah.
was Trump, 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 Trump. I mean, whether Bruce, I've interviewed Bruce before on the campaign trail, whatever his motives are, I mean, I don't understand why they isolated him into its own thing.
They didn't
He
even
is,
name the video the man that got Trump elected. Think about that. And later in the video, it said, well, look, we have no idea what impact he had. I would almost wager that he had zero impact. My
I
mom,
don't,
I was
I don't think Bruce Carter is the reason 5% less African Americans came out for Hillary Clinton.
exactly. My mom, love her to death. She voted for Hillary Clinton. Now, this is with me as her son saying that woman is horrible. That woman is not going to get you. My mom knew all of the record of Hillary Clinton because I told her in the most verbose of terms, and she still went out and voted for Hillary Clinton. I would wager that, and that's purely because African Americans have a certain view of politics where we only have one party. There is no Republican Party. They're just the Democratic Party because people in the other party are maniacs. So even with me as her son, who she loves deeply, still was not enough to get her to vote Jill Stein. I have a hard time believing that somebody driving around in a bus greatly, affected the political landscape in those states. It just annoyed me. That video annoyed me to no end. I saw what she was seeing in it. It was annoying me. I couldn't figure out why. And I think I watched it a few times, and I was like, that's what it is. That's what it is. My audience have a few. Some people left a few super chats, so I want to read these because there may be questions. Bo like a leopard doing live Matt Fowl update on Hazley News 9 p.m. Eastern. Fair enough. Let's see. Anna Maxa, is this why libertarians hate government? Oh, that's an interesting question. If government worked, I love this. Yes, Anna Max, I love my audience. So she's making there's a deeper political point in that maybe she's getting at, or maybe she's not, but I'm going to talk about it. This thing of like if government worked, would people hate it so much? Like, so when Social Security and Medicare came out, Social Security got rid of poverty by like a third. Like, it was amazing in what it did. People love Social Security and Medicare by like 80%, like massive percentiles. Obamacare, not so much. And is it because Obamacare has people's rates going up? In one of my other videos, one guy was 200 and something, and it went up to $700 when he moved into a different state. Now, I would hate Obamacare too if I had Obamacare and the rates went up 50, 60%, as opposed to having a system that actually worked. Is it possible that right-wingers and Republicans look at this stuff and said, Democrats don't believe in poverty, and if they wanted to do something about it, fair enough, but I don't see them doing something about it. And the programs that they're doing, they seem to be taking my taxes, but I don't see the real world effect of the taxes that I'm paying.
I think it's very simple. Social Security came at a time when the entire government wasn't auctioned off to corporations, which began in the late 70s, early 80s. So, I think libertarians, progressives, smart people hate government that's bought off, because government can work. It's worked in the past. I think FDR did a hell of a job, other than,
the black
some terrible things he did. But, when government actually takes the initiative, unrestrained by corporate influence, the bourgeoisie, it could do some really amazing things for people, lift people out of poverty, create stability and middle-class jobs. But when publicly funded representatives don't actually represent people, but they're donors and things like that, I hate them too. So I agree with the libertarians on that. The difference between Social Security and Obamacare: Social Security was a government program. Obamacare was a Republican program that basically gave blowjobs to insurance companies. So that's the main difference.
And protect the drug companies and, all that. Think about the ridiculousness of the government having all of this authority and ceding it away to this kind of corporate interest. One of the interesting things, when Obama took the office and he was trying to pass that right-wing healthcare plan, part of the reason that he didn't push the drug companies or put anything for the drug companies because he didn't want them to come out against his healthcare plan. So this is government being cowed by the industry that they're supposed to be regulating. Many of those places were skyrocketing rates. And that's another thing that annoys me about Obama. You have this African American who have a lot of people pushing this idea of hope and change. Many of them, African Americans, voting for him like 90 something percent. And he passes a healthcare plan that, yes, does a little something for the standpoint of healthcare, but those people are still paying drugs. It's like the people who are hit the hardest on that stuff are the lower end of the economic spectrum. Yes, half of the country is poor. So, yes, a lot of those people are white. But when you're talking about the desperate level of poverty, that's when you get into, the situation of African Americans. Oh, yes, it aggravates me. Yeah, I agree with you. The people don't like bought off government. It's not so much they dislike government. Trina, be fine. I'm going to take your word for it, Trina. I don't see why you would lie to me. Try contacting Mike Adams on a Health Ranger channel. He has a testing lab in Colorado. I'm betting he would help out. He offers testing to everybody in the United States.
Cool. Mike Adams. All right. I'll jot that down.
Let me see. There's another one. In fact, there were two. Oh, maybe I was wrong. Okay. Yeah, I think that was it. Let me see. I don't see any other. Oh, here we are. Thanks for covering this, Jamal and Jordan. That is the Daily Dope Show with a weed thing in it. Nice, very nice. I always say I drink my liquor because I can't drink it. And Winger. Reverend Barber has taken up MLK's Poor People's Campaign going on right now at the Capitol near you. June 23rd, 2018 rally in Washington, D.C. Make plans now. Join us, please. Winger, I'm probably going to go to that. So I had a conversation with what's her name? Nick Braun. It's not Nick Braun. It was the person who works with Nick Braun. I can't think of her name. Carol. And yeah, I'm probably going to go to that. In fact, I'm probably going to cover that. So here's another one. Beltazar 228. Snyder's corruption history is more twisted in Flint than Hanover. Guess who's going to be getting Democrat rising star Nancy Pelosi's endorsement? Are you serious? Nancy Pelosi is going to endorse Snyder?
He's not. He's term limited, so I don't know what he's running for. He's out of office at the end of this year.
Snyder's corruption history is more twisted in Flint than in Hanover. Guess who's going to be getting rising Democratic star? I love the rising Democratic star Nancy Pelosi part. Wow. Beltazar 228. I hope you're wrong on that, man. If Nancy, I really hope Nancy Pelosi is not endorsing Snyder.
I wouldn't put it past her.
Jesus Christ. All right, Jordan. Thank you, man. I appreciate you coming on and giving this story. This story aggravates the shit out of me. My emotions don't typically run wet. They tend to run hot. And so in my head, it's how do you fight back for something like this and how do you resist? I really hope the residents of Flint organize themselves in a way to break Snyder from a standpoint. Oh, well, you say he's not running anymore, but to break whoever is running, coming behind him and to do something about this. I don't like this idea that nothing happens when mass corruption or mass incompetence take hold in this way. I like it less that media, for the most part, shuts you out and trying to get this story out.
I really appreciate you being interested and taking the time, because you'd be interested even in some progressive folks that aren't as interested. So yeah, thank you for having me on, and I will definitely once I have the next part of this out, hop on with you.
Very cool. Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, guys. Oh, Belter, he explains it. Snyder's of Hanover is a pretzel company. Also, I was highlighting Nancy's great endorsement since. Sarcasm. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. And of course, you guys can always support through Patreon or Super Chat, of course. I'm going to put Jordan's information at the bottom if you guys want to. In fact, I'm going to put his article at the bottom also in case you guys want to read a little bit more about it to get more in detail about what he was talking about. It's a great article. It's detailed. Check it out and check him out, please. So you guys have a good one. Thanks, everyone.